The storm roared like a freight train barreling through the Tennessee backwoods, slamming sheets of rain against Sam Carver's old cabin with relentless fury. Sam bolted upright in bed, his heart pounding louder than the thunder, sweat beading on his weathered brow. Inside, a single lamp flickered as the wind howled, rattling the windows and threatening to rip the tin roof clean off. A crack of lightning split the sky, illuminating the room, and there, at the foot of his bed, Daisy whimpered, her golden fur bristling. The phone shrieked on the bedside table, its shrill ring cutting through the chaos. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and Sam knew it before he even reached for the receiver. Hope you enjoyed this story. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear where you're watching from. Now, let's continue with the story. Rain pelted the cabin in a ceaseless drumbeat, each drop a reminder of the wild, untamed land Sam called home. The forest beyond his windows stretched endlessly, a dark sea of pines swaying violently under the storm's assault. At 58, Sam was no stranger to Tennessee's temperamental weather, but this felt different, darker, heavier, like the night itself was pressing down on him. Daisy, his golden retriever of 7 years, lifted her head, ears pricking forward as if she too sensed the urgency in the air. Her warm brown eyes locked onto him, steady and trusting, a silent promise that whatever came next, they'd face it together. Sam grabbed the phone, his rough fingers fumbling for a moment before he pressed it to his ear. "Hello?" His voice rasped, thick with sleep and the gravel of a man who'd spent too many nights alone. "Sam, it's Evie from Havenwood." Dr. Evelyn Monroe's voice crackled through the line, sharp with tension despite the static. "We need you here. Now. We found him this morning. 3 tiger cubs, newborns, their mother's gone." Sam swung his legs over the bed's edge, the cold hardwood biting into his bare feet. "Gone? You mean dead?" He yanked on his boots, the leather creaking as he moved, his mind already racing ahead. A pause stretched across the line, heavy with uncertainty. "We don't know. No body, no signs of a fight, just gone. Sam, these cubs, they're weak, dehydrated. If we don't act fast, they won't make it." Daisy hopped off the bed, her tail wagging faintly despite the unease rippling through her frame. She knew that tone in Sam's voice, the clipped urgency that meant something needed saving. For 7 years she'd been his shadow through every rescue, flooded creeks pulling calves under, owls tangled in barbed wire, fawns left shivering in the frost. She'd seen the heartbreak and the triumphs, her steady presence a balm to Sam's often solitary soul. Now, she padded after him as he crossed the cabin's small living room, her nails clicking softly against the worn floorboards. "I'm on my way," Sam said, snatching his raincoat from the hook by the door. He hung up without waiting for a reply, the phone clattering back into its cradle. Outside, the storm showed no mercy. Rain lashed sideways, driven by gusts that bent the trees like reeds. Sam pulled the coat tight around his broad shoulders, the fabric already damp from a leak he'd never gotten around to fixing. The cabin, perched on a ridge overlooking the Holston River Valley, was a relic of simpler days, days when Clara's laughter had filled the space, before sickness took her and left him with nothing but Daisy in the woods. He paused at the door, hand on the knob, and glanced back at Daisy. She stood ready, her golden coat catching the dim glow of the lamp, her eyes bright with something unspoken. For a moment Sam's chest tightened. He remembered another stormy night, years back, when Clara had gripped his hand as thunder shook the walls, her voice soft but firm. "We'll get through it, Sam. Always do." That memory flickered now, a ghost in the shadows urging him forward. "Let's go, girl," he muttered, swinging the door open. The wind hit him like a fist, cold and wet, stealing his breath as he stepped onto the sagging porch. Daisy followed, undeterred, her fur instantly matted by the downpour. Sam's truck waited in the muddy yard, an old Ford that groaned as much as he did on mornings like this. He slogged through the mire, boots sinking into the sodden earth, and yanked the driver's door open with a creak. Daisy leapt into the passenger seat, shaking off water that sprayed across the cracked vinyl. The engine sputtered to life after 2 tries, headlights slicing through the rain-soaked darkness. The dirt road to Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary was a winding beast even in good weather, but now it was a river of mud, treacherous and slick. Sam gripped the wheel, knuckles whitening as the truck lurched forward. Trees loomed on either side, their branches thrashing like they might snap and bury him alive. 3 tiger cubs, motherless, clinging to life. Evie's words echoed in his head, mingling with the storm's roar. Tigers didn't just vanish in these parts. Something had happened, something unnatural, and the thought gnawed at him as the Wipers fought a losing battle against the deluge. Daisy shifted beside him, her wet nose brushing his arm. She whined softly, a sound that cut through the noise and settled into Sam's bones. He didn't know what waited at Havenwood, whether those cubs could be saved, or what had torn their mother away. But as the truck rattled down the flooded path, tires slipping on curves, he felt a flicker of something he hadn't in years: purpose. Whatever lay ahead, Daisy would be there, and somehow that was enough to keep him driving into the storm. The sanctuary was still miles off, a faint promise beyond the trees. Sam didn't know it yet, but this night would change everything, not just for him, but for Daisy, and for 3 fragile lives he couldn't yet imagine. The rain kept falling, the wind kept screaming, and somewhere in the dark, a mystery waited to unfold. The truck's headlights carved a shaky path through the rain-soaked night as Sam Carver pulled into the muddy lot of Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary. The storm had eased slightly, its roar softening to a steady grumble, but the air still hung heavy with dampness, the scent of wet pine and earth seeping through the cracked window. Sam killed the engine, the sudden silence pressing against his ears. Daisy sat upright beside him, her golden fur dripping onto the seat, her ears twitching as she stared toward the low brick building ahead. Its windows glowed faintly, a beacon in the Tennessee wilderness promising warmth but hinting at trouble. Sam exhaled, his breath fogging briefly in the chill, and shoved the door open. Mud sucked at his boots as he stepped out, the ground a slick mess from hours of unrelenting rain. Daisy leapt down after him, her paws sinking into the mire, but she stayed close, her tail wagging faintly despite the cold. Sam pulled his raincoat tighter, the fabric clinging to his shoulders, and trudged toward the entrance. The sanctuary wasn't much to look at, squat and weathered, surrounded by towering trees, but it was home to creatures most folks in these parts only saw in books. Tigers, orphaned fawns, injured hawks, all found refuge here, thanks to people like Dr. Evelyn Monroe. Evie, as Sam called her, had been running the place for years, her sharp mind matched only by her stubborn heart. The door creaked as he pushed it open, a wave of warmth hitting him like a slap. Inside, the medical bay smelled of antiseptic and damp fur, a stark contrast to the wild chaos outside. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a sterile glow across the room. In the center, nestled in a heated enclosure, were 3 tiny tiger cubs, barely bigger than house cats, their fur matted, and their stripes faint against pale, soft bodies. Their eyes, barely slits, flickered open and shut, and their whimpers filled the space, weak but insistent. Sam stopped short, his chest tightening at the sight. They were so small, so fragile, like they might slip away if he looked too long. "Sam, over here!" Evie's voice cut through the haze, sharp but frayed at the edges. She stood by the enclosure, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, her green eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Her white coat was rumpled, stained with something dark, mud or blood, Sam couldn't tell. She waved him over, her movements quick, almost frantic. "Thank God you're here! They're hanging on by a thread." Sam crossed the room, Daisy padding silently at his heels. Up close, the cubs looked even worse, tiny paws twitching, ribs faintly visible beneath their thin coats. He'd seen orphaned animals before, plenty of them, but these were different. Tigers weren't native to Tennessee. They belonged to the Sanctuary Small Conservation Program, a project Evie had fought tooth and nail to keep funded. For their mother to vanish without a trace, it didn't sit right. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low, gruff from the cold and the weight of what he was seeing. Evie ran a hand over her face, smudging a streak of dirt across her cheek. "We found them at dawn, out near the eastern pens. No sign of the mother, no tracks, no blood, nothing. Just these 3, huddled under a bush like they'd been dropped there." She paused, her gaze dropping to the cubs. "They're dehydrated, half-starved. We've got them on formula, but it's not enough. They need more than we can give." Sam knelt by the enclosure, his knees creaking as he studied the cubs. The smallest one, a little female, her breath shallow, let out a broken cry, barely louder than the hum of the heater. Daisy stepped forward, her nose brushing the edge of the box, sniffing the air with quiet intensity. Sam reached out to steady her, but before he could, she did something he didn't expect. With a soft whine, she lowered her head into the enclosure, her wet nose nudging the smallest cub. Then slowly, deliberately, she began to lick it, her tongue moving in gentle, rhythmic strokes, cleaning the damp fur with a tenderness that stopped Sam cold. "Evie, look at this," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Evie turned, her eyes widening as Daisy continued, the cub's whimpers softening under her touch. The other 2 cubs, slightly bigger but still frail, shifted closer, their tiny bodies drawn to the warmth of Daisy's presence. One stretched out a paw, brushing against her muzzle, and Daisy didn't flinch. She licked that one too, then the third, her golden head moving between them like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Well, I'll be damned," Evie said, a faint laugh breaking through her fatigue. "She's mothering them." She crouched beside Sam, her shoulder brushing his as they watched. "I've seen dogs take to pups or kittens, but tigers, this is something else." Sam didn't answer right away. His mind spun, caught between awe and memory. Daisy had always been special. Clara used to call her the heart of the house, back when their little cabin echoed with laughter instead of silence. After Clara's death, Daisy had stayed by his side, her steady gaze pulling him through the worst of it. Now, watching her with these cubs, he saw something of Clara in her again, that same gentle strength, that same refusal to let anything slip away without a fight. "She knows they need her," he said finally, his throat tight. "She's always known." Evie nodded, her expression softening. My grandma used to tell me about a fawn she raised back in '62. Found it half dead in the woods after a flood. Bottle-fed it till it could stand on its own. Said it followed her around like a shadow after that. She glanced at Daisy, a small smile tugging at her lips. Maybe Daisy's got some of that in her too. The smallest cub let out a sigh, a tiny contented sound that seemed to ripple through the room. It nestled closer to Daisy, its head resting against her snout, and for the first time since the phone rang, Sam felt a flicker of hope. But questions gnawed at him. Where had the mother gone? Why had she left them? He looked at Evie, her face etched with the same unspoken worry. "We need to figure out what happened to her," he said. "This isn't normal." "I know," Evie replied, her voice steady but laced with unease. "Tomorrow, we'll search the grounds. For now, let's keep these little ones alive." She stood, brushing her hands on her coat, but her eyes lingered on Daisy and the cubs, a quiet wonder settling over her. Sam stayed where he was, kneeling by the enclosure, Daisy's warmth radiating beside him. The cubs were still fragile, their lives hanging by a thread, but Daisy had given them something no human could: a mother's touch. Outside, the rain tapped against the windows, softer now, a promise of calmer hours ahead. But Sam knew this was only the beginning. Whatever had torn that tiger family apart was still out there, waiting to be uncovered, and he couldn't shake the feeling that Daisy's role in this was far from over. The morning sun crept over the Tennessee hills, pale and watery, casting long shadows across the muddy expanse of Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary. The storm had finally relented, leaving behind a world drenched and bruised, trees drooping under the weight of soaked leaves, puddles shimmering in the ruts of the dirt paths. Sam Carver stood outside the medical bay, his boots caked with mud, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and pine. Daisy lay at his feet, her golden fur still damp from the night before, her eyes fixed on the horizon as if she could sense the unease lingering in the quiet. Inside, the tiger cubs slept fitfully, their tiny bodies nestled against the warmth Daisy had given them. But Sam's mind was elsewhere, tangled in the mystery of their missing mother. Evie emerged from the bay, her white coat swapped for a flannel jacket, her dark hair tied back with a frayed elastic. She carried a thermos of coffee, the steam curling up into the chilly air, and handed Sam a chipped mug without a word. He took it, the heat seeping into his calloused hands, grounding him as he sipped the bitter brew. "They're stable," Evie said, her voice low, steadying herself against the weight of the night. "Daisy's a miracle, Sam. I've never seen anything like it." She glanced at the dog, a flicker of wonder softening her tired features. Sam nodded, his gaze drifting to Daisy. "She's got a way about her," he murmured, his thoughts brushing against memories of Clara. Her hands gentle on a sick calf, her voice soothing a frightened stray. Daisy had inherited that somehow, a quiet strength that defied explanation. But the cub's survival didn't erase the question gnawing at him. "What about the mother?" he asked, turning to Evie. "Tigers don't just walk off and leave their young. Something's not right." Evie's jaw tightened, her green eyes narrowing as she stared out toward the eastern pens. "I've been thinking the same thing. Tommy went out at first light, said he found something near the river." She hesitated, her fingers tightening around her mug. Paw prints, big ones, leading into the water. Then nothing, like she just disappeared. Sam's stomach twisted, the coffee turning sour on his tongue. The Holston River ran deep and wild this time of year, swollen from the storm, its current strong enough to sweep away anything caught in its grip. He'd seen it happen before: cows drowned in flash floods, trees uprooted and dragged downstream. A tiger, even a strong one, might not stand a chance. "We need to look," he said, setting the mug on a nearby stump. "If she's out there, dead or alive, we've got to know." Evie nodded, her resolve mirroring his own. "I'll get the team together, but Sam—" She paused, her voice softening. "Those cubs need Daisy now. If we're out there chasing ghosts, she can't be with them." Before Sam could answer, a figure approached through the mist. A wiry woman with silver hair pulled into a loose braid, her face etched with the lines of a life spent outdoors. Martha Grayson, a volunteer who'd been at Havenwood longer than most of the staff, carried herself with a quiet dignity, her denim overalls splattered with mud. She'd lost her husband to the war decades back and her only son to a car wreck, but she'd poured what was left of her heart into this place. "Mourning you two," she said, her voice warm but tinged with something heavy. "Heard about the cubs. Thought I'd come see for myself." Sam tipped his head in greeting. "They're hanging on, thanks to Daisy, but we've got a problem. Mother's missing." Martha's eyes darkened, her gaze drifting toward the river. "Ain't the first time. Something strange has happened round here," she said, her Tennessee drawl thickening as she spoke. "My daddy used to tell stories, said the woods keep their own secrets. When I was a girl, a doe lost her fawn in a flood. Folks swore they saw her ghost lingering by the water, watching over it even after it was gone." She paused, her hands clasping together. "Maybe that tiger's still out there, in spirit if not in body, looking after her babies." Evie raised an eyebrow, skepticism flickering across her face, but Sam didn't dismiss it outright. He'd lived in these hills long enough to know. The line between fact and folklore was thin, especially in a place like this where the land seemed to breathe its own tales. "Ghost or not," he said, "we need answers." "I'll check the river with Tommy. You stay with the cubs, Evie." Martha stepped closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "You be careful, Sam Carver. The river's got a way of taking what it wants. I've seen it swallow more than it gives back." Her words hung in the air, heavy with warning, but there was a glint in her eyes, something like faith, or maybe just the stubborn hope of a woman who'd outlasted her share of storms. Sam met her gaze, a flicker of unease stirring in his chest. "I'll manage," he said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. He whistled softly, and Daisy rose to her feet, her tail brushing his leg as she followed him back to the medical bay. Inside, the cubs stirred, their tiny forms huddled together in the enclosure. Daisy nosed her way in, settling beside them with a sigh, her tongue resuming its gentle work. The smallest one, Luna, Evie had called her, nuzzled closer, a faint purr rumbling from her chest. Sam watched, his heart caught between awe and worry. Daisy was their lifeline, but she couldn't stay here forever, not if he was heading into the woods. Evie followed him in, her boots leaving muddy prints on the tile. "I'll keep an eye on them," she said, her tone firm but gentle. "But Sam, if you find anything out there, anything at all, you let me know right away. We can't lose her, not after this." "I will," he promised, though the weight of it settled on his shoulders like a stone. He glanced at Daisy one last time, her golden head resting protectively over the cubs, and felt a pang of something he couldn't name, pride, fear, maybe both. The river waited, its secrets buried in the mud and current, and Sam knew he couldn't turn back now. Whatever had happened to that tiger, it was tied to these cubs, to Daisy, to all of them. And as he stepped back into the damp morning, Martha's words echoed in his mind, a mother's spirit lingering in the shadows, unwilling to let go. The sun climbed higher over Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary, spilling soft light through the wet leaves of the Tennessee forest, turning the muddy paths into a patchwork of glistening pools. Sam Carver stood outside the medical bay, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his raincoat, the damp fabric still clinging to his shoulders from the night before. Daisy lay inside with the tiger cubs, Casper, Juniper, and Luna, their tiny bodies now a little stronger, their whimpers less desperate under her watchful care. The air smelled of renewal, of earth washed clean, but a restless energy buzzed beneath it all, tugging at Sam's thoughts. He'd returned from the river empty-handed, the paw prints Tommy had found swallowed by the churning water, leaving more questions than answers. Evie stepped out beside him, her flannel jacket swapped back for her white coat, a clipboard tucked under her arm. She squinted into the morning light, her face etched with the kind of exhaustion that didn't fade with coffee. "They're eating," she said, nodding toward the bay. "Formula's helpin'. But Daisy's the real difference. She's keeping them warm, calm, alive." Her voice carried a quiet marvel, the kind that came from seeing something you couldn't quite explain. Sam grunted, his gaze drifting to the window where he could see Daisy's golden form curled around the cubs. "She's got a gift," he said, his words rough but steady. "Always has." He pulled a worn notebook from his pocket, its pages crinkled from years of use, and flipped it open. Started writing it down. What she's doing, how they're reacting. Might help us figure out what's next. Evie's eyes lit up, a spark cutting through her fatigue. "Good idea. If she's their surrogate now, we need to track it, every detail. This isn't just about survival anymore. It's something bigger." She paused, then added, "I've never seen a dog take to tiger cubs like this. It's unnatural, in the best way." Before Sam could reply, a shadow fell across the path. Tommy, the young staffer who'd scouted the river, trudging toward them with his hands stuffed in his jeans. His freckled face was set in a scowl, his boots kicking up mud with every step. At 22, he was all sharp edges and quick opinions, the kind of kid who thought he knew more than he did. "This ain't right," he said, stopping short, his voice loud enough to startle a pair of birds from a nearby branch. "That dog's gonna ruin 'em. Tigers need to be wild, not coddled like house pets." Sam turned slowly, his jaw tightening as he met Tommy's glare. "She's keeping them alive," he said, his tone low, deliberate. "You saw them this morning, half dead, shiverin'. Daisy's the only reason they're still breathin'." Tommy crossed his arms, his stance rigid. "Sure, now. But what happens when they're bigger? They're predators, Sam. They need to hunt, to fight, not roll over for a belly rub. You're messing with nature, and it's gonna backfire." Evie stepped forward, her clipboard tapping against her thigh. "Tommy, we're not raising them to be pets. Daisy's a bridge, something to get them through this. We'll transition them when they're strong enough." Her voice was calm, scientific, but there was an edge to it, a warning not to push too far. Tommy snorted, kicking at a clump of mud. "Transition them how?" "They're imprinting on her. I've read about this. Orphaned animals get too attached. They don't survive in the wild. You're setting them up to fail." He pointed toward the bay, his finger jabbing the air. "That dog's no tiger. She's confusing 'em." Sam felt heat rise in his chest, a slow burn that tightened his fists. He'd heard doubts like this before, back when he'd nursed a lame colt to health, when folks said it'd never run again. It had, because he'd trusted his gut, trusted the bond that grew beyond reason. Daisy was no different. "You're wrong," he said, stepping closer, his voice steady but fierce. "She's not confusing 'em. She's teaching 'em something we can't. Trust. Love. That's what's holding 'em together right now. You take that away and they've got nothing." Tommy opened his mouth, but Sam cut him off, his words spilling out like water breaching a dam. "I've seen what happens when you give up too soon. Seen it. With calves, with fawns, with people. My wife, Clara, she never quit on anything, not even when the odds were stacked against her. Daisy's the same. She's fighting for those cubs, and I'll be damned if I let anyone stop her." His breath came hard, the memory of Clara's last days flashing behind his eyes, her frail hand in his, her smile fading but never gone. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Tommy's scowl faltered, his shoulders slumping as he looked away, the fight draining out of him. Evie watched, her expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of something, respect, maybe, in her eyes. "We'll figure it out, Tommy," she said, her tone softer now. But Sam's right. Daisy's what they need today. Tomorrow's another story. Tommy muttered something under his breath and stalked off, his boots squelching in the mud. Sam let out a slow breath, his hands unclenching as he turned back to the window. Inside, Daisy lifted her head, her ears twitching as the cub stirred. Casper, the boldest, batted at her snout with a clumsy paw, and she huffed, nudging him back with a gentleness that made Sam's throat ache. Juniper and Luna joined in, their movements awkward but alive, a far cry from the lifeless forms he'd seen hours ago. Evie followed his gaze, her clipboard forgotten in her hands. "You're good at this, Sam," she said quietly. "Seeing what matters. We'll need that when we bring in Lila." She hesitated, then added, "She's the old tigress in the big pen. If anyone can teach these cubs what it means to be tigers, it's her. But Daisy's got to stay in the picture, for now." Sam nodded, tucking the notebook back into his pocket. "Lila, huh? When do we introduce him?" The idea of a real tiger stepping into Daisy's world sent a jolt through him, part curiosity, part unease. He trusted Daisy, but a tigress was another matter, wild and unpredictable. "Soon," Evie said, her voice firm but tinged with anticipation. "Once the cubs are steady, we'll do it careful, slow. But it's the next step." She glanced at him, a small smile breaking through. "You ready for that?" Sam didn't answer right away. He watched Daisy settle back down, her golden fur a stark contrast to the cub's faint stripes, her presence a steady anchor in a storm he couldn't yet see the end of. "Ready as I'll ever be," he said finally, though he wasn't sure it was true. The river had given no answers. Tommy's doubts still lingered, and now a tigress loomed on the horizon. Whatever came next, Daisy would face it head-on, and so would he. The afternoon sun hung low over Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary, its golden rays filtering through the dense canopy of Tennessee pines, casting dappled shadows across the muddy ground. Sam Carver stood at the edge of the medical bay, his boots still crusted from the morning's trek, his hands resting on his hips as he watched the world settle into a fragile calm. Inside, Daisy lay with the tiger cubs, Casper, Juniper, and Luna, their tiny bodies pressed against her golden fur, their breathing steadier now, a testament to her unrelenting care. Sam's notebook sat heavy in his pocket, its pages filling with notes about her every move. but his mind was already shifting to what came next. Evie had mentioned Lila, the old tigress, and the thought of her stirred something restless in him, a mix of hope and wariness he couldn't shake. Evie emerged from the bay, her white coat slung over one arm, her flannel sleeves rolled up to her elbows. She carried a stack of files, their edges worn and yellowed, and her green eyes glinted with a purpose that made Sam straighten. "Found something," she said, dropping the files onto a nearby picnic table with a thud. "Lila's records. Been meaning to dig into them since we started talking about her." She flipped open the top folder, her finger tracing lines of faded ink. "She's been here 12 years, came from a circus that shut down in Kentucky. Had a litter once, back in 2009, but they didn't make it. Flood took 'em," Sam's brow furrowed, the weight of that sinking in. "She lost her cubs." He glanced toward the big pen, a sprawling enclosure half hidden by trees, its chain-link fence glinting in the sunlight. Lila was out there somewhere, a shadow among the shadows, and the idea of her carrying that kind of grief made her feel less distant, more real. Evie nodded, her voice softening. "Yeah, she was a good mother from what the notes say. Kept them close, fought to keep them alive, but the water came too fast. After that, she got quiet, solitary, never aggressive, just apart." She closed the file, her gaze meeting Sam's. "If anyone's going to understand these cubs, it's her. But Daisy's still their anchor. We got to figure out how to bring them together." Sam rubbed the back of his neck, the ache from a sleepless night settling into his bones. "How do we even start? Daisy's not going to let him go easy, and Lila, she's wild, Evie. What if she doesn't take to him?" The question hung between them, heavy with the unknown. He trusted Daisy with his life, but a tigress was another story. One with claws and teeth and instincts he couldn't predict. "We'll go slow," Evie said, her tone firm but measured. "Move Daisy and the cubs to a holding area near Lila's pen tomorrow. Let them see or smell her, get used to her presence. No rush, just instinct meeting instinct." She paused, then added, "I've seen cross-species bonds before, Sam, but this? It's a gamble. A good one, I think." Before Sam could respond, a rustle of leaves drew their attention. Martha Grayson stepped out from the path, her silver braids swaying as she approached, a thermos of sweet tea cradled in her hands. She'd been tending the sanctuary's garden all morning, her overalls streaked with dirt, but her eyes carried that same steady warmth Sam had come to rely on. "Heard y'all talking about Lila," she said, setting the thermos down. "She's a queen, that one. Quiet, but proud. Seen her watching the birds sometimes, like she's thinking deep thoughts." Sam managed a small smile. "You think she'll take to the cubs, Martha?" Martha poured tea into a tin cup and handed it to him, her movements slow, deliberate. "I reckon she might. She's got a heart under all that fur, lost something precious once, same as those little ones. And Daisy's got a way of softening folks, even tigers." She glanced at Evie, her lips quirking. "You're doing right by 'em, bringing her in. Just don't push too hard." Evie took the advice with a nod, her fingers tapping the files. "We won't. Tomorrow's just a first step." She turned to Sam. "You in?" "Yeah," he said, sipping the tea, its sweetness cutting through the day's tension. "Let's do it." He followed Evie and Martha to the big pen, Daisy trotting behind after a quick check on the cubs. The enclosure stretched wide, its borders lined with thick oaks and mossy rocks, a slice of wilderness carved out of the Tennessee hills. At its center, Lila lay sprawled on a flat stone, her massive body still but alert, her amber eyes glinting as she watched them approach. Her stripes cut sharp lines across her fur, faded slightly with age, but there was a regal air to her. A silent queen, just as Martha had said. Sam stopped at the fence, Daisy pressing against his leg, her ears twitching as she sniffed the air. Lila lifted her head, her gaze locking onto them with a calm intensity that sent a shiver down Sam's spine. She didn't growl, didn't pace, just watched, her breath a faint puff in the cool air. "She knows we're here," he muttered, his hand resting on Daisy's head. "What's she thinking?" Evie leaned against the fence, her voice low. "Hard to say, but she's not spooked. That's a start." She pointed to a smaller Holden pen nearby, its gate rusted but sturdy. "That's where we'll bring Daisy and the cubs tomorrow. Close enough for Lila to see, far enough to keep it safe." Martha crossed her arms, her eyes on Lila. "She's waitin'," she said softly. "Been waitin' a long time, maybe. For something to call her own again." Her words carried a weight that settled over them, a whisper of the past threading into the present. The next morning came fast. Sam and Evie moved the cubs in a crate, Daisy walking beside them, her tail wagging faintly as they neared the holding pen. The cubs, Casper, Juniper, and Luna, whimpered at the shift, but Daisy's presence calmed them, her nose nudging the crate as Sam set it down. Lila rose from her stone, her massive frame moving with slow grace as she paced closer to the fence, her eyes fixed on the newcomers. Sam held his breath, his hand tightening on the gate. Daisy stepped forward, her body tense but steady, and let out a soft bark, a greeting, not a challenge. Lila stopped, her ears flicking, and then she chuffed, a deep, rumbling sound that rolled through the air like distant thunder. The cubs froze, their tiny heads tilting, and Daisy barked again, softer this time as if answering. Lila lowered herself to the ground, her gaze never leaving them, and chuffed once more, a warm, tentative welcome. Sam exhaled, a grin tugging at his lips. "She's talking to him," he said, glancing at Evie. "She is," Evie replied, her voice thick with wonder. "And they're listening." She scribbled a note on her clipboard, her hand shaking slightly. "This might just work." Sam watched as Daisy settled beside the crate, the cubs pressing against its bars, their eyes darting between her and Lila. Something was beginning here, something wild and fragile and bigger than them all. Tomorrow would bring them closer, but for now it was enough. The storm was coming again, Sam could feel it in the air, and Lila's amber eyes promised she'd be ready when it hit. The sky over Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary darkened ominously as evening crept in, heavy clouds rolling across the Tennessee hills like a bruise spreading over the horizon. Sam Carver stood by the holding pen, his raincoat flapping in the rising wind, his eyes fixed on Daisy and the tiger cubs, Casper, Juniper, and Luna, nestled against her golden fur. The air crackled with the promise of a storm, sharper and fiercer than the one that had brought them here, and Sam's gut twisted with a familiar unease. Lila, the old tigress, paced her enclosure nearby, her massive paws silent against the damp earth, her amber eyes glinting with a restless energy that mirrored the brewing chaos above. Evie joined him, her flannel jacket zipped tight, her clipboard abandoned for a flashlight she gripped like a lifeline. "Weather report's bad," she said, her voice cutting through the wind's low howl. "Flood warning, worst we've had in years. The river's already rising." She pointed toward the Holston, its swollen waters audible even from here, a distant roar growing louder with every gust. Sam nodded, his jaw tight. "We need to secure the pens. If that water breaches—" He didn't finish the thought, but the image flashed in his mind. Mud and debris crashing through, the cubs swept away before they had even had a chance. He glanced at Daisy, her ears twitching as she lifted her head, sensing the shift. "She knows something's comin'," he muttered, his hand brushing her fur as he opened the crate to check the cubs. Lila chuffed from her pen, a deep guttural sound that vibrated through the air, drawing the cubs' attention. Casper, the boldest, pressed against the crate's bars, his tiny growl lost in the wind. Juniper and Luna huddled closer to Daisy, their eyes wide, reflecting the first flickers of lightning. "She's on edge too," Evie said, her flashlight beam sweeping over Lila's pacing form. "We've got sandbags in the shed. Let's move." They worked fast, hauling bags of sand from the supply shed, their boots slipping in the thickening mud. Tommy appeared, his earlier defiance replaced by a grim determination, his wiry frame straining as he stacked bags along the lower fences. Martha trudged out too, her silver braid tucked under a hood, her hands steady as she reinforced the medical bay's entrance. The wind picked up, rattling the chain link, and rain began to fall, fat, cold drops that stung Sam's face as he dragged the last bag into place. It wasn't enough. He knew it, but it was all they had. Then it hit. A crack of thunder shook the ground, lightning splitting the sky like a jagged wound, and the rain turned torrential, a wall of water that blurred the world beyond the pens. Sam shouted over the roar, "Check the cubs." Evie bolted for the holding pen, her flashlight beam bouncing as she ran. Sam followed, Daisy barking sharply at his heels, her fur plastered to her sides. The cubs whimpered, their tiny forms trembling as water seeped under the gate, pooling around Daisy's paws. Lila roared, a sound that cut through the storm, primal and fierce. Her massive body slamming against her fence as the flood surged in. The lower edge of her pen buckled, the chain link bending under the weight of rushing water and debris. Sam froze, his heart lurching as he saw her stumble, her paws slipping in the mud. The current caught her, dragging her toward the weakened section, her amber eyes flashing with panic as she thrashed against it. "Lila!" Evie yelled, her voice nearly lost in the chaos. She lunged for the fence, but Sam grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "You'll go down with her," he shouted, his grip iron tight. The tigress fought, her claws digging into the earth, but the water was relentless, a hungry torrent that swallowed her in an instant, her striped body vanishing into the swirling dark. The cubs cried out, their high-pitched wails piercing Sam's chest. But before he could move, Daisy leapt into action. She plunged into the flood, her golden form cutting through the water with a ferocity Sam had never seen. "Daisy, no!" he bellowed, his voice raw, but she was gone, paddling against the current toward where Lila had disappeared. Sam's breath caught, his mind reeling with images of Clara slipping away, helpless, unreachable. Not again, he thought, and without a second's hesitation he waded in after her. The cold hit him like a punch, stealing his air as the water rose to his thighs, then his waist. Debris slammed against him, branches, rocks, a piece of shattered fence, but he pushed forward, his boots sinking into the muck. Daisy barked ahead, a sharp, commanding sound, and through the rain Sam saw her reach Lila. The tigress thrashed, her head breaking the surface, her golden eyes wide with primal fear. Daisy angled herself, her smaller body pressing against Lila's flank, guiding her toward a half-submerged platform near the pen's edge. Sam stumbled closer, the current nearly knocking him off his feet. Tommy appeared beside him, his face pale but set, and together they grabbed the platform's edge, bracing it as Daisy urged Lila forward. The tigress lunged, her claws scraping wood, and with a final surge, she heaved herself up, collapsing in a heaving, sodden heap. Daisy scrambled after her, trembling and soaked, her nose nudging Lila's face as if to say, "You're safe now." Sam climbed onto the platform, his body shaking from cold and exertion, and pulled Daisy close, her wet fur warm against his hands. The cub's cries echoed from the holding pen, frantic but alive, and Evie's flashlight beam found them, her silhouette staggering through the flood. "They're okay!" she shouted, her voice hoarse. "Sandbags held!" Lila lay still, her massive chest rising and falling, her paws curling around the platform's edge as the water receded slightly. Daisy pressed against her, licking stray droplets from her fur, and the tigress exhaled, a low, rumbling chuff that felt like gratitude. Sam looked at them, his heart pounding, and felt Tommy's hand on his shoulder, a silent apology in the grip. The storm raged on, its fury unbroken, but something had shifted. Daisy had saved Lila, not just from the flood, but from a solitude Sam knew too well. The cubs needed them both now, Daisy's warmth, Lila's strength, and as the rain lashed down, Sam knew the real fight was just beginning. Tomorrow they'd rebuild, but tonight they'd survived, together. Dawn broke over Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary with a fragile, hesitant light, the sky a pale gray streaked with fading clouds. The storm had passed, leaving the Tennessee forest battered, trees bent low, their branches strewn across the muddy ground, pools of murky water reflecting the weak sun. Sam Carver stood at the edge of the holding pen, his raincoat hanging heavy with dampness, his boots caked with the night's mud. Daisy lay beside the tiger cubs, Casper, Juniper, and Luna, her golden fur matted but warm, her steady presence anchoring them as they slept. Across the fence, Lila sprawled on her platform, her massive frame still dripping, her amber eyes half-lidded but watchful. The flood had receded, but its scars remained, etched into the bent fences and washed-out paths. Evie trudged over, her flannel jacket torn at the sleeve, her face streaked with dirt and exhaustion. She carried a thermos of coffee, its steam curling into the crisp air, and handed Sam a tin mug without a word. He took it, the heat seeping into his chilled hands, and sipped slowly, the bitterness grounding him after a night that felt like a fever dream. "Fence held, barely," Evie said, her voice hoarse but steady. "Cubs are fine, Daisy kept 'em dry. Lila's shaken, but she's tough. We got lucky." Sam nodded, his gaze drifting to Daisy and Lila. "Luck and Daisy," he muttered, his throat tight. He could still see her leaping into the flood, her small body cutting through the torrent to reach Lila, a courage that defied everything he'd thought possible. "She saved her, Evie, didn't even hesitate." Evie followed his look, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "She's something else, and Lila, look at her now." The tigress shifted, her head resting closer to the fence, her eyes locked on Daisy and the cubs with a quiet intensity. "They're working together already. Co-parenting almost." She paused, then added, "We need a plan, Sam. This bond, it's real. We can't break it. Not after last night." Before Sam could answer, a crunch of footsteps drew their attention. Martha Grayson approached, her silver braid tucked under a wool cap, her overalls splattered with fresh mud from checking the sanctuary's edges. She carried a basket of biscuits, their warmth cutting through the damp chill, and set it on a stump. "Mornin'," she said, her drawl soft but firm. Heard about the ruckus? Y'all did good keeping them safe. She glanced at Lila and Daisy, her eyes crinkling. That's a family now, ain't it? Sam took a biscuit, the buttery scent stirring a flicker of comfort. Seems like it, he said, breaking off a piece. But we've got work ahead. Pens are a mess, and those cubs, they're growing fast. He looked at Evie. What's the next step? Evie sipped her coffee, her mind already turning. We reinforce the fences today, can't risk another breach. Then we figure out how to keep Daisy and Lila close. Move them to a shared space, maybe, once the cubs are stronger. They need both. Daisy's care, Lila's lessons. She hesitated, then added, word's spreadin', too. Got a call from a reporter this morning. Wants to see the miracle dog. Sam's brow furrowed, unease prickling his spine. A reporter? Here? He didn't like outsiders poking around, not when things were still so raw, so uncertain. Havenwood was a sanctuary, not a circus. Martha snorted, crossing her arms. Folks love a story, especially one like this. Dog saving a tiger. That's front-page gold in these parts. She stepped closer, her voice dropping. But you watch out, Sam. They'll twist it if you let 'em. I've seen it before. A city type's coming down, acting like we're some kind of show. Daisy's too good for that. Evie nodded, her jaw tight. I told 'em no, for now, but it's going to get out. Tommy's already talking to the staff, and he's not quiet about it. She glanced at Sam, a question in her eyes. What do you think? Sam chewed the biscuit, the taste grounding him as his mind raced. Tommy's doubts from yesterday still stung, but the kid had stepped up in the flood, helped pull Lila to safety. Maybe he'd earned a say, but Sam wasn't ready for the world to barge in. Keep him out as long as we can, he said finally. This ain't about headlines, it's about those cubs, and Daisy and Lila. We figure that out first. Martha smiled, a glint of approval in her gaze. That's the Tennessee way, family over fame. My mama used to say, take care of your own, and the rest'll sort itself. You're doing right by 'em, Sam. She patted his shoulder, her touch firm, steadying him like the oaks that had weathered the storm. Evie set her mug down, her resolve hardening. All right. Fences today, then we plan the move. I'll talk to Tommy, keep him in line. She looked at Lila, then Daisy, a spark of wonder breaking through her fatigue. They're a team now. We've got to make it work. Sam watched as Lila shifted, her massive paw brushing the fence. Her chuff a low rumble that reached the cubs. Casper stirred, his tiny head lifting, and Daisy licked him gently, her eyes darting to Lila, as if acknowledging her. Something unspoken passed between them. A bond forged in the flood, fragile but fierce. Sam felt it too, a pull toward tomorrow, toward the work of rebuilding and the promise of what this strange family could become. The sanctuary stretched out before him, battered but breathing, its muddy paths a testament to survival. The cubs would grow, the pens would hold, and Daisy and Lila would guide them, together. But the reporter's call lingered in Sam's mind, a shadow on the horizon. Sooner or later, the world would come knocking, and he'd have to decide how much to let in. For now, though, it was enough to stand here, coffee in hand, Daisy at his side, and Lila's steady gaze holding them all. Autumn swept into Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary with a quiet grace, the Tennessee hills ablaze with golden leaves that fluttered down, like embers carpeting the muddy paths in a rustling shroud. Sam Carver stood by the holding pen, his breath fogging in the crisp morning air, his hands buried in the pockets of his worn jacket. Daisy lay inside with the tiger cubs, Casper, Juniper, and Luna, their once fragile bodies now plump and sturdy, their faint stripes sharpening against their fur. Across the reinforced fence, Lila lounged on her platform, her massive form still but alert, her amber eyes tracking the cubs' every move. The flood scars had faded, the pens rebuilt stronger, but time marched on, leaving its own marks on them all. Sam watched as Casper pounced on a leaf, his claws flashing briefly before he tumbled over Juniper, their playful growls filling the air. Luna sat apart, her gaze flicking between Daisy and Lila, her stillness a quiet intensity that reminded Sam of the tigress across the fence. They were growing fast, too fast maybe, and their wildness was waking, a restless energy that tugged at the edges of Daisy's gentle care. She nosed Casper back into line, her tongue smoothing his ruffled fur, but Sam saw the shift. Their swipes were sharper now, their teeth glinting in the sunlight. Evie approached, her boots crunching on the fallen leaves, a stack of notes tucked under her arm. Her flannel shirt peeked out from her white coat, a nod to the chill settling over the sanctuary. "They're hitting milestones," she said, her voice steady but tinged with concern. "Casper's stalking instincts are kicking in. Watch how he crouches. Juniper's getting bolder, and Luna, she's observing, learning." She glanced at Daisy, her brow furrowing. "They're still her cubs, but they're tigers, Sam. We've got to think about what's next." Sam nodded, his throat tightening as he looked at Daisy. Her muzzle was grayer now, her steps slower after long days with the cubs, though her eyes still shone with that fierce love he'd come to lean on. "She's holdin' 'em together," he said, his voice rough. "But yeah, they're changin'. Lila's got to step in more, teach 'em what Daisy can't." The thought of Daisy fading from their world gnawed at him, a quiet ache he couldn't shake. Evie set her notes on a stump, pulling a pen from her pocket. "We're moving them to a shared enclosure next week. Daisy, Lila, the cubs, all together. It's time. But Sam—" She hesitated, her gaze softening. "Daisy's not young. They're outpacing her already. We've got to watch her close." Before Sam could respond, a rustle of paper caught his ear. He turned to the cabin, its porch sagging under years of neglect, and saw a drawer ajar in the old desk Clara had loved. He crossed the yard, the wind tugging at his jacket, and pulled it open. Inside, buried under faded receipts, was a letter, Clara's handwriting curling across the page in soft, familiar loops. "Sam." It began. "When the dark comes, find the light in it. You've got a heart that sees what others miss. Don't let go of that." His chest tightened, her voice echoing through the words, a whisper from years gone by. He folded the letter carefully, tucking it into his pocket as Daisy barked softly behind him. She'd rolled onto her back, letting Juniper clamber over her belly, her tail thumping the ground despite the cub's sharper swipes. Sam smiled, a bittersweet pang settling in his bones. Clara had been right. He'd seen the light in Daisy from the start, and now it glowed in these cubs, wild as they were. But Evie's warning lingered, a shadow over the moment. Martha shuffled over, her silver braid swaying, a basket of apples in her arms from the sanctuary's orchard. "They're a sight, ain't they?" she said, setting the basket down. "Growing like weeds, but still Daisy's babies." She glanced at Lila, her eyes crinkling. "And hers too. Funny how that works. 2 mamas, 1 family." Sam took an apple, its skin cool against his palm. "Funny's one word for it," he said, his tone dry but warm. "Evie's moving 'em next week. Shared space. Think it'll hold?" Martha nodded, her gaze steady. "It'll hold if you let it. Lila's ready. She's been watching 'em like a hawk since the flood. Daisy's the heart, but Lila's the backbone. They'll balance each other." She paused, then added, "World's gonna notice soon, Sam. Can't keep this quiet forever." Sam's jaw tightened, the reporter's call from yesterday flashing in his mind. "Yeah, well, they can wait," he said, his voice firm. "This ain't about them. It's about getting these cubs through." But Martha's words stuck. A quiet truth he couldn't ignore. The sanctuary felt smaller now, the outside world pressing closer with every passing day. Evie picked up her notes, her pen tapping the page. "Next week's the start," she said, her eyes on Lila. "We'll see how they settle. Daisy, Lila, the cubs. But Sam, we've got to be ready for anything. They're not babies anymore." She glanced at Daisy, a flicker of worry crossing her face, then back at Sam. "You good with that?" Sam met her gaze, Clara's letter a steady weight against his chest. "Yeah," he said, his voice low but sure. "I'm good." He looked at Daisy, her golden form a beacon in the autumn light, and felt the shift coming, wildness rising, time slipping, the world waiting. Next week would test them all, and beyond that the whispers of fame loomed. For now, though, Daisy rolled with the cubs, Lila watched, and Sam held on to the light Clara had told him to find. The late autumn sun cast a brittle light over Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary, its rays filtering through the thinning Tennessee trees, painting the shared enclosure in shades of amber and shadow. Sam Carver stood by the fence, his jacket zipped against the chill, his breath visible in the crisp air. Inside, Daisy romped with the tiger cubs, Casper, Juniper, and Luna, her golden fur a stark contrast to their deepening stripes. They were bigger now, their movements sharp and deliberate, claws flashing as they wrestled her playfully. Lila lounged nearby, her massive body stretched across a patch of dry grass, her amber eyes tracking them with a quiet authority that had grown since they'd moved in together a week ago. Sam's hands gripped the chain link, his notebook forgotten in his pocket as he watched Daisy dodge Casper's pounce, her tail wagging despite the effort. She was slower these days, her graying muzzle more pronounced, but her love for the cubs burned as bright as ever. Lila chuffed softly, a low rumble that drew Juniper's attention, and the cub bounded over, nuzzling the tigress's massive paw. It was working, Daisy's warmth and Lila's strength weaving a bond that defied every rule Sam knew, but the sanctuary no longer felt like their own. Evie approached, her boots crunching on fallen leaves, a clipboard in hand and a frown creasing her brow. "They're here," she said, her voice tight. "Scientists from Knoxville, behaviorists, conservationists, word got out after the reporter's call. They've been watching since dawn." She nodded toward a cluster of figures near the main gate, men and women in coats, scribbling notes. Their voices a low hum carried on the wind. Sam's stomach knotted, Martha's warning echoing in his mind. "What do they want?" he asked, though he already knew. The world had found Daisy and her cubs, and it wasn't letting go. "They're fascinated," Evie said, flipping a page on her clipboard. "Cross-species nurturing on this scale, it's unheard of. They're talking studies, papers, maybe a documentary. But there's a catch." She hesitated, her green eyes meeting his. "Some want to split 'em up. Say the cubs need to be with tigers only, no dogs. They're worried about unnatural habits." Sam's grip tightened, his knuckles whitening against the fence. "Split 'em up." His voice was low, edged with a fury he hadn't felt since Tommy's doubts months back. After all this? Daisy saved him, Lila too. They're a family, Evie. You don't tear that apart 'cause some city folks think they know better. Evie raised a hand, her tone steady but strained. I'm with you, Sam. I've seen what Daisy's done. Lila, too. But they're not wrong about the cubs growing wild. Casper's stalking's getting sharper. Juniper's swipes could hurt her soon. I don't want 'em split, but I'm caught here. Science says one thing, my gut says another. She looked at the enclosure, her jaw tight. We've got to fight for this, but it's going to be a mess. Before Sam could reply, a man in a gray coat broke from the group, striding toward them with a clipboard of his own. He was tall, his glasses glinting in the sun, his voice clipped and precise. Dr. Monroe, Mr. Carver, I'm Dr. Ellis, UT, Knoxville. We've been observing the dynamic here. Remarkable truly, but unsustainable. These cubs need tiger socialization, not canine. We're recommending immediate separation, relocate the dog, integrate them with Lila full time. Sam stepped forward, his shadow falling across Ellis. Her name's Daisy, he said, his voice a quiet growl. And she's the reason those cubs are alive. You don't get to waltz in and undo that 'cause it don't fit your books. He pointed at the enclosure, where Daisy licked Luna's ear, the cub purring softly. Look at 'em. That's not unsustainable. That's survival. Ellis adjusted his glasses, unfazed. I respect the sentiment, but data matters. Prolonged exposure risks behavioral anomalies, dependency, weakened instincts. We've seen it in other cases. This isn't personal, it's science. It's personal to them, Sam shot back, his hand brushing Clara's letter in his pocket, her words fueling his resolve. You take Daisy away, you're not saving 'em, you're breaking 'em. Lila's teaching 'em plenty, but Daisy's their heart. You can't measure that with your damn charts. Evie stepped between them, her voice firm. Doctor, Ellis, we're not rushing this. Daisy and Lila are co-parenting successfully. I've got notes, observations, proof it's working. Give us time to show you. She glanced at Sam, a silent plea for patience, though her own frustration simmered beneath the surface. Ellis frowned, scribbling something. Time's not infinite, Doctor. Monroe, we'll be back. Expect a formal proposal soon. He turned, rejoining his group, their murmurs rising like a storm on the horizon. Sam watched them go, his chest heaving. Daisy barked softly, drawing his eyes back to her, her golden form a steady light amid the growing shadows. Evie sighed, her shoulders slumping. They'll push, Sam. We've got to be ready. Prove this works or they'll take her. Sam nodded, his resolve hardening. Then we prove it. The cubs tumbled around Daisy, Lila's chuff calling them close, and Sam knew the fight wasn't over. The world was closing in, and soon it'd demand more than proof. It'd demand a choice. Winter settled over Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary like a heavy blanket, the Tennessee hills cloaked in frost, the air sharp with the bite of early December. Sam Carver stood on the porch of his cabin, his breath puffing in the dim morning light, his hands wrapped around a mug of coffee gone cold. Daisy sat beside him, her golden fur dusted with specks of ice, her graying muzzle catching the faint sun as she gazed toward the shared enclosure. Inside, Casper, Juniper, and Luna, now lanky and strong, prowled the space with Lila, their stripes bold against the frozen ground. The scientist's threat to separate them still hung in the air, a shadow Sam couldn't shake, but something else loomed now, pulling his focus far beyond these woods. The phone had rung at dawn, its shrill tone cutting through the quiet. Sam had answered, expecting Evie with an update, but the voice on the line was unfamiliar, soft, urgent, accented. A woman from a sanctuary in India, her words tumbling out in a rush. 3 orphan tiger cubs, barely clinging to life, found in a flooded den. They'd heard of Daisy, the miracle dog from Tennessee, and they were pleading for her help. Sam's chest had tightened, his eyes drifting to Daisy as the woman spoke, her request echoing Clara's letter. Find the light in the dark. Could she do it again? Did she have the strength? Evie arrived as he stepped off the porch, her truck rattling up the icy path, her flannel scarf tucked tight against the wind. She climbed out, her face drawn with worry, a folder in hand. You heard? She asked, her voice low, knowing. They called me too. Wanted my take on it. Sam, it's a long shot. She's old in the trip. She stopped, her gaze flicking to Daisy, who rose stiffly, her tail wagging faintly. Sam set the mug on the railing, his jaw tight. She's tough, he said, though doubt gnawed at him. She saved Lila, saved these cubs, if they need her. He trailed off, the weight of it settling on his shoulders. Daisy nosed his hand, her warmth steady against his cold fingers, and he saw Clara in her eyes, unyielding, even at the end. Martha shuffled up the path, her silver braid tucked under a wool cap, a hand-stitched handkerchief clutched in her gnarled fingers. Heard the news, she said, her drawl soft but firm. Daisy's a gift, Sam, ours to the world. She's got more to give if you let her. She pressed the handkerchief into his palm, its edges embroidered with tiny daisies, a quiet blessing from Tennessee soil. For luck, she added, her eyes crinkling with faith. Sam looked at it, then at Daisy, his throat thick. All right, he said finally, his voice rough. She goes. Evie nodded, scribbling something in her folder, her relief tempered by unease. They moved to the enclosure, Daisy trotting beside them, her steps slow but sure. Casper, Juniper, and Luna bounded over, their massive heads pressing against the fence, their chuffs deep and resonant. Daisy barked softly, her nose brushing each of them, first Casper, then Juniper, then Luna, a goodbye woven with love. Lila rose from her perch, her amber eyes locking onto Daisy, a low rumble rolling from her chest. The cubs flanked Daisy, their bodies warm against her, and for a moment they stood together, a family forged in flood and frost. Sam's chest ached, Clara's words whispering through him, "Don't let go." But this wasn't letting go, it was letting her shine, one last time. Evie touched his arm, her voice gentle. I'll handle things here. Lila's got the cubs. You get her ready. Flight's tomorrow. She paused, then added, She'll come back, Sam. She's too stubborn not to. Sam managed a small smile, his hand resting on Daisy's head. Yes, she is. The cubs nuzzled her again, their farewell lingering as Sam led her away, Martha's handkerchief a soft weight in his pocket. India waited, a new challenge on the horizon, and Daisy's light would burn there too. Back at Havenwood, Lila's steady gaze promised she'd hold the line, but Sam couldn't shake the feeling that this journey would test them all. Daisy most of all. Tomorrow she'd fly, and he'd wait, trusting her heart to carry her through. The air in the Indian sanctuary hung thick with humidity, a stark contrast to the frosty chill Sam Carver had left behind in Tennessee. Dust swirled around the low concrete building, its walls weathered by monsoons as Daisy stepped gingerly onto the foreign soil. Her golden fur gleamed despite the long flight, though her movements were slower, her gray muzzle more pronounced under the harsh sun. Sam had stayed back at Havenwood, his heart heavy with Martha's handkerchief in his pocket, but he'd entrusted Daisy to the sanctuary staff, a wiry man named Ravi, and a soft-spoken woman, Angeli, who'd greeted her with wide eyes and cautious hope. 3 orphaned tiger cubs waited inside, their frail bodies barely stirring in a heated crate. Ravi led Daisy to the enclosure, his voice low as he explained through a crackling phone call to Sam later that day. They're weak. Found them in a flooded den, mother drowned. 2 days old, maybe 3. We didn't think they'd last. He paused, watching Daisy sniff the air, her ears twitching as she approached the crate. Angeli knelt beside it, her hands trembling as she opened the latch, revealing the cubs, smaller than Casper, Juniper, and Luna had been, their eyes still shut, their whimpers faint against the hum of a generator. Daisy didn't hesitate. She lowered her head, her wet nose brushing the smallest cub. A female. Her breath shallow and ragged. With a soft whine she began to lick, her tongue moving in slow, rhythmic strokes, just as she had all those months ago in Tennessee. The cub stirred, its tiny paws twitching, and let out a trembling sigh, nestling closer to her warmth. The other 2, a scrappy male and a quiet female, shifted toward her, drawn by instinct, their bodies pressing against her golden fur. Angeli's breath caught, her eyes glistening as she whispered, "She's doing it again." Sam listened through the phone, his cabin silent save for the wind rattling the windows. "She's got it in her," he said, his voice rough with pride and worry. "What's the smallest one like?" He could picture Daisy's gentle care, but the distance gnawed at him, a quiet fear that might be too much even for her. Ravi's tone softened. "She was fading, barely moving when we brought her in. Daisy's keeping her alive, Sam. We're calling her Clara after your wife. You told us once on the flight papers. Felt right." Sam's throat tightened. Clara's letter a phantom weight in his pocket, her words echoing across continents. He nodded, though Ravi couldn't see, and managed a gruff, "Good name." The hours stretched on, Ravi updating Sam as Daisy worked. Clara clung to life, her sighs growing steadier under Daisy's tongue, while the other 2, named Ashok and Priya, gained strength, their whimpers turning to small, demanding cries. Angeli fed them formula with a dropper, Daisy licking the stray droplets from their chins, her presence a steady anchor in the chaos of survival. The staff marveled, their voices hushed with awe, a mirror to Havenwood's first days. Daisy, the miracle dog, rewriting the rules once more. By nightfall, Ravi called again, his exhaustion palpable. "Clara's a fighter. She almost slipped, but Daisy wouldn't let her go. Kept licking, kept her warm. They're all stable now, Sam. Your girl's a wonder." Sam leaned against the cabin wall, relief washing over him, though his chest ached with her absence. "She's coming home soon," he said, more to himself than Ravi. "Tell her I'm waiting." Back in Tennessee, the frost thickened, Havenwood quiet under a starless sky. Lila paced the enclosure, her amber eyes sharp as Casper, Juniper, and Luna sprawled nearby, their growing bodies a testament to the family Daisy had built. Evie checked in, her voice crackling over the line after Ravi's call. "She's doing it, Sam. Same magic, different place. Lila's holding steady here. They'll be ready for her when she's back." Sam hung up, his gaze drifting to the dark hills. Daisy's light burned bright in India, saving Clara and her siblings, but he felt the pull of time, her age, the miles, the cubs she'd left behind. She'd return soon, he told himself, her journey unfinished, her heart still tied to Havenwood. The night deepened, and Sam waited, trusting her to come home whole. Twilight draped Havenwood Wildlife Sanctuary in a soft golden glow, the Tennessee hills awash with the last light of a fading day, the air crisp with the scent of pine and frost. Sam Carver stood at the cabin porch, his weathered hands resting on the railing, his eyes fixed on the shared enclosure below. The frost had thickened since Daisy's departure, but now she was back, her golden fur dulled by age and travel, her step slow as she emerged from the truck Evie had driven from the airport. Casper, Juniper, and Luna bounded to the fence, their massive forms graceful and strong, their chuffs deep and resonant as they pressed against the chain link, greeting her with a tenderness that belied their wildness. Sam descended the steps, his boots crunching on the icy path, Martha's handkerchief a soft weight in his pocket. Daisy turned to him, her tail wagging faintly, her gray muzzle catching the light as she barked, a soft, weary sound that carried all the miles she'd traveled. He knelt beside her, his hands sinking into her fur, warm despite the chill, and felt the years settle over them both. "You did it, girl," he murmured, his voice thick. "Clara'd be proud." The name lingered, a bridge between Tennessee and India, where Daisy had saved 3 more lives, Clara, Ashok, and Priya, before returning home. Evie climbed out of the truck, her flannel scarf loose around her neck, her green eyes soft with relief. "She's a trooper," she said, leaning against the hood. "They're thriving over there. Clara's the Spitfire, leading the others. Daisy gave him a chance, Sam, just like here." She glanced at the enclosure, where Layla rose from her perch, her massive frame moving with a slow grace, her amber eyes locking onto Daisy with a quiet recognition. The cubs, now young tigers, their stripes bold and their claws sharp, nuzzled Daisy through the fence, their heads dwarfing hers as she licked their noses, her tongue slower but steady. Lila approached, her chuff a low rumble that rolled through the dusk, and Daisy barked back, a greeting woven with trust. They stood together, Daisy small and golden, Lila vast and wild, a family forged in flood and time, their bond unshaken by distance or growth. Sam watched, his chest tight, Clara's letter whispering in his mind, "Find the light." Martha shuffled up, her silver braid tucked under a wool cap, a basket of biscuits in her arms. "She's home," she said, her drawl warm and sure. "Look at 'em. Still hers, always will be." She set the basket down, her eyes crinkling as Casper batted at Daisy's tail, Juniper sprawled beside her, and Luna rested her head near Lila's paws. "That's a legacy, Sam. Tennessee's gift, spreadin' far." Sam nodded, pulling the letter from his pocket, its edges worn from months of carrying. He unfolded it, the twilight casting shadows over Clara's words, and read aloud, his voice steady but soft. "Sam, when the dark comes, find the light in it. You've got a heart that sees what others miss. Don't let go of that. Family is where love lives." He paused, his gaze drifting to Daisy, then Lila, then the cubs. "She knew, didn't she? Before I did." Evie stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm. "She did. And Daisy proved it. Here, in India, everywhere." She smiled, a rare softness breaking through her fatigue. "The world knows now. Scientists, reporters, sanctuaries. They're rethinking it all 'cause of her. No one's splitting this family up." That night, under a sky ablaze with stars, Lila slipped away. Sam found her at dawn, her massive body still on the platform, her amber eyes closed, her breath gone in the quiet. The cubs pressed against her, their chuffs mournful but calm, and Daisy lay beside them, her head resting on Lila's flank, a final farewell to the tigress who'd shared her burden. Sam buried her under an oak, the earth cold but yielding, and felt the circle close. Lila's strength passing to the cubs she'd raised with Daisy. Days later, Daisy slowed, her naps lengthening, her barks fading to soft whines. Sam sat with her on the porch, the cubs watching from the enclosure, now full-grown tigers carrying her lessons, wild yet gentle, fierce yet loyal. One evening as the sun dipped low, she rested her head in his lap, her eyes dim but warm, and slipped away. Her breath a final sigh against his hand. He buried her beside Lila, Martha's handkerchief tucked into the earth, a piece of Tennessee forever hers. Sam stood by their graves, the sanctuary thriving around him, Casper, Juniper, and Luna, a testament to a love that rewrote the wild. Evie joined him, her voice soft. She changed everything, Sam. He nodded, Clara's words his. Anchor. Family is where love lives. Daisy's light had burned bright across continents and species, and though she was gone, it lived on, in the cubs, in him, in a world forever touched by her heart. The stars shone overhead, and Sam smiled, the story complete. I hope you enjoyed this story. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss touching stories. Leave a like and then comment below what you thought of the emotional stories. See you in the next video.